Previously on the Six Eye Sun Show. I guess I'm excited to re-experience them through this lens, and I hope you have some fun coming along with me as I trot along and try to explore my feelings on each route. In true schoolyard fashion, I'm going to do so by tackling the list of girls in alphabetical order going by last name.
Let's talk about Shizune Hakamichi.
Shizune's route might very well be the most polarizing route in Katawa Shoujo. Reception has classically been on the mixed side, from people hung up on the technical aspects to the denial of a proper Misha route. I remember not thinking much of it myself my first playthrough when I was 17, and in my meandering attempts to revisit Shizune's route in the years that would follow, I found my attention falling short compared to routes like Lily's or Hanako's. But I replayed all of the routes of the game so I could write notes on the subject a couple of years ago. I did Reen's route, then Hanako's route, and I guess halfway through Lily's I began to get more and more curious about Shizune. Writing so many notes on each character led me, more than ever, to appreciate the boundaries where Shizune's dialogue ends and Misha's translations begin. Before long in Lily's route, I began to get pretty excited about retreading my steps with Shizune. Perhaps it impacted my biases, and perhaps it didn't. But I gotta say, on the whole, I really like Shizune's route after 10 odd years, and I'm glad I've set this up in a way that allows me to tackle her first, because I found my recent appreciation for her and her route one of the most surprising revelations I've had about the game since I first played it. I want to attempt to spread the love a little bit, because Shizune is a pretty cool character, and I think her route is vastly misunderstood. So tell me. But first, some housekeeping. The crazy sods at 4Leaf actually did it. They got Katawa Shoujo on Steam. This is pretty huge. It gives it a broader range of dissemination, and it's likely that people will be pretty fresh to this game for the first time. However, I'm going to continue to play the game that I picked up a couple of years ago. The Steam version comes with some nifty things like achievements and updated artwork in some cases, but it also redacts H scenes. You'll need to download a patch on itch.com to restore the game to its full version, and, well, I guess the idea of arbitrarily picking up and playing a functionally incomplete version of the game, it just doesn't really sit right with me, even if I think achievements are cool. This video is part of a larger series of retrospectives about Katawa Shoujo, so while I can't exactly force you at gunpoint to watch the previous entry, I would highly recommend you do. It contains a brief recap of major elements of the first act of the story that I'm mostly going to gloss over in subsequent entries, in favor of a more character-focused analytic approach, as well as discussing other elements of Katawa Shoujo, such as music, art, and the way they handled certain elements of their writing, which leads me to my next point. Look, there's no beating around the bush here. Katawa Shoujo is an eroge, or rather, an eroge. Thank you. For the uninitiated, that means it contains depictions and descriptions of sexual intercourse. I haven't gotten in trouble with YouTube for stuff on my channel yet. I'm not itching to start here, so I'll be blurring out these scenes when they occur. However, I would argue that they are an inextricable part of Katawa Shoujo's story, and thus I will be discussing them when it's relevant. All this to say, if you're sex repulsed or it's generally a sore or uncomfortable subject for you, I think you might want to sit this one out. That said, I hope it doesn't push you to avoid the game entirely, as there is a way to turn adult scenes off in the game's options, and sexual situations are more of an incidental detail in each route rather than the focus of the game outright. Additionally, people who watched episode 1 would know that I would be doing additional episodes around all of the girls and talking about their routes at length, which means that this video is going to contain full story spoilers for Shizune Hakamichi's route. I'm truly not trying to be on some lame gatekeeper shit here either. I couldn't be more thrilled that the Steam release is going to bring first-time players into the fold, but this game has been out, you know? And it's been pretty accessible all this time, so I feel pretty within my rights to go as full bore with spoilers as I want. Anyway, we have a lot to get into here, so let's jump into it, yeah? In the first episode of the series, I pulled a follow my heart run where I picked what I would do given this situation and the context. It led me to pick the following choices. Act 1, if you're trying to get onto Shizune's route, is relatively simple. I think a key component behind being on the route is to act aggressively during the game of Risk in the library. This gives you a decision a bit later where you have the option to either read your book or go talk to Hanako, but if you at least acted aggressively during this Risk game, you get a new option where you can wait for Shizune and Misha to make a decision about a place to get lunch. Having no plans of our own, the girls are content to take us out, but not before we're nearly taken out by track star Emi Ibarazaki. We have a heart murmur, and Shizune tears a strip out of Emi for not abiding by rules regarding running in the hallway. No further harm is done, however, so onward we go to lunch. Apparently a visit to a tea house is in the mix, so off we go to town. Hisao is a little put out that it isn't a more traditional feudal-era situation, but upon entering we see that the server is Yuko, the librarian, which seems like an acceptable trade-off to me. I always thought Yuko was so cute. After lunch is ordered, Misha asks about whether or not we'd like to join the student council again. This is a pretty consistent logline across interactions with these two in Act 1, but they're definitely perfecting the art of the cell by taking us out to lunch first. Hisao protests that people always say, come on, it'll be fun, about things that are never ever fun, but I don't know, treat me to a turkey sandwich and a coffee and I could be convinced of just about anything. Shizune starts to put the pedal to the metal, saying that it benefits everyone since they want to spend time with us and that she thought Hisao would appreciate it. Hisao responds by grilling them about how many people are in the student council, and when they refuse to confirm our fears about it only being the two of them, he graciously decides to give joining them a trial run. Shizune signs something that Misha doesn't want to tell Hisao, but Hisao is reassured that it's something nice, so, content to leave well enough alone for now, he finishes his meal and plays hooky with the girls to take a tour of the town. After they return to class, they accost Hisao again while he returns to his room and asks him to pick up some stuff from the art supply room upstairs. Misha notes that Shizune doesn't like the art teacher and that stairs personally make her dizzy. With a list in hand, Hisao heads up to the art room, meets Rin Tezuka, gets accused of having chronic penile dysfunction, and accrues the ingredients for Shizune. After their meeting, Hisao runs into Misha on his way out of the room, her and Shizune coming to check on him after he took too long acquainting himself with Rin. Shizune grills Rin about the timeline of completing her project ahead of the festival, and seems content to take her leave then. We help Rin bring her supplies downstairs and, in order, get accosted by the nurse, promise to exercise, watch Rin paint her mural, go running with Emi the following morning, get flashbanged by Kenji's dick in the shower, and witness Lily and Shizune having an argument about student council shit. Now, I sided with Lily the first time we played this game because I just thought it was the right thing to do, but we're actually approaching this game with a little more intention, and unfortunately for me, that means disagreeing with my own morals in the interest of moving things forward with Shizune. Hisao tries to save his own skin from being caught in the crossfire, we earn a little ire from Lily, and Hisao covers for Misha and Shizune while they attend to some festival stuff. It does kinda suck to explicitly move forward and away from the trajectory of Lily and Hanako, since I like both of them an awful lot, but this isn't a goodbye, it's more of a see you later. Hisao observes Misha and Shizune talking after class and takes notice of how exhausting the idea of interpreting for Shizune must be with how quickly she uses sign language. Festival setup is beginning to reach a fever pitch at the school, and Shizune is beginning to grouse about us not helping out more. We end up getting roped into building stalls. It's nighttime by the time we finish up. Shizune treats us to drinks from the vending machine, and basking in the satisfaction of a job well done commences. I like that Hisao is a little cagey about the idea of being asked out again. Misha laughs it off, but she doesn't really understand the context. It's universally understandable to be once bitten and twice shy when it comes to asking someone out not going well. It's quite another thing for it to have gone so badly that it permanently alters the trajectory of one's life. She begins to lean a little more earnestly into asking him to join, since we're spending so much time together already. Hisao points out that it seems like she's having a little trouble getting her words out. In the end, Hisao decides to join up for good, enticed by the idea of less work after the festival and spending more time with two cute girls. And that's real. The girls are thrilled about the recent addition to the party, and Hisao leaves for his room. The next morning, we wake up early to go jogging with Emi. We don't push ourselves when we're given the option. Hisao makes a note to think of alternate forms of exercise, and he returns to his room, feeling annoyed about the state of his condition when he looks at his medication. He feels he's allowed himself to ignore the fact that he has a problem, but tries to look for ways to rationalize a path forward. I talked about Hisao a decent amount in my previous video, and I rejected the notion that he's an inherent self-insert, as is fairly common across games of this genre. Hisao has a lot of personality, and I like that the game sometimes affords us little moments to take that in. We have a talk with Kenji. I'm opting to go kind of light in discussing Kenji in these videos because I wouldn't take experiencing him for the first time away from anyone, but I love that he points out that he doesn't carry a phone in this version of Act 1, and Hisao's first instinct is to short circuit. Why don't you have a phone? How can you not have a phone? No phone at all? No phone? It's hilarious. It's like he briefly turns into George Costanza.
You know, we're living in a society!
Misha and Shizune suddenly arrive, and Kenji quickly disappears. They strong-arm us into letting them into our room, having apparently picked us to do student council shit. Misha talks to us while Shizune gets nosy about stuff in Hisao's room. The feeling of being exposed crawls in his balls. The girls begin to sniff around Hisao's medication, and we're offered a choice between kicking them out of the room or dodging the subject entirely. It's pretty similar to the convenience store choice that you can run into if you side with Lily, in that if you pick anything other than an intended option, it drops you like you're hot directly into the bad ending. Man, I hate that shit, especially since I value my privacy, and if somebody intruded in my personal space and started asking me invasive questions about my stuff, I would kick them directly in the perineum. Look it up. But we dodge the subject in the interest of keeping things copacetic. Shizune tries to prod like she always does, but she respects Hisao's boundaries and not wanting to discuss the matter further, and decides that he can tell them about it when they become better friends if he wants. I need me a freak like that. No, but in all seriousness, it's a sweet scene. I'll never say I dislike these two characters. Shizune and Misha are a little too intense for me at the best of times, but after deciding to act in favor of eschewing them for the first part of this retrospective series, it's hard to deny that they really grow on you if you decide to give them a chance. Hisao seems to realize the same, realizing that they do genuinely consider him a friend and that they want to get closer to him, which is a bit of a shock to the system after his recent isolation. Work gets done, and we have some lunch that was cooked up by Shizune to prep for a festival stall. We get to see Shizune is rubbed off on Hisao as well, as he doesn't hesitate to tease her a little about the fact that she's cooked for us. Shizune mentions that Hisao should see what he's done for the festival so that he can appreciate his work, and Misha asks if he might be down to go with the two of them. Hisao sticks around to do some extra work, but he's eventually ushered out to go back to class. He eventually returns to the student council room, not being sure if going back to class is worth it with so little time left, and wonders if they just wanted him to leave so that they can talk about stuff. Just a little gossip.
Boys!
The next day, Shizune and Misha wake Hisao up from tender slumber, and to his surprise, it's only to suggest they skip class to do something fun. They have going to the Shanghai, the tea house where Yuko works, in mind, so we get our uniform on and off we trot. Hisao freaks out when he realizes there isn't a menu, and Shizune and Misha fuck with him for fun before asking him if he would like to hang out with them at the festival. Hisao seems to think Shizune is trying to engage him in a battle of wills, and he seems willing to rise to the challenge, although he also seems all too willing to overthink the minutiae of it. Having seen a more introspective moment earlier where he thinks about making a change, it's kind of fun in its own way to see the more positive ways spending time with Shizune is starting to rub off on him. Hisao notices how cute she is, and when Shizune gives him a note mentioning there's going to be work to do when he gets back, he crushes it in his fist dramatically, but is sad when no one sees it. Hisao often plays straight man to some of the more eccentric characters in the cast, so I like when we get little hints like this that he isn't always above being a bit silly himself sometimes. And I like Hisao a lot, he's just a little guy. There is indeed a lot of work to be done. Tons of signboards need to be made up for the festival yet, and Hisao notices at this point that Shizune likely does 60-hour work weeks for the council on top of regular classes. We get to have a moment alone with Misha when Shizune goes out to get some tacks, which prompts Hisao to ask if her and Shizune go back. It isn't that much of a meet cute. Misha was assigned to sit next to Shizune and decided to crack that particular nut in the hopes of greasing the wheels in case they were sat together all year. Misha also takes the opportunity to personally thank Hisao for joining the council, and they get back to work when Shizune returns. The festival kicks off on Sunday, and people are already dick deep in soba by the time Hisao wakes up. He pontificates briefly upon festival games and whether or not he should give a gift to Shizune or Misha. He's clearly pretty interested in both of them, but is understandably a little nervous about the idea of shooting a shot. He runs into Shizune as soon as he leaves his room. He must play games for the two, as Shizune alleges that she refuses to throw things. So we step outside to join the festivities. Shizune orders takoyaki, which is pretty righteous, and eventually the trio goes to play some games. Hisao wins a purple cat doll and briefly contemplates the state of his condition as he tries to win another. Moments later, he has a heart murmur, and the three end up taking it easy for the rest of the night. The trio decides to have dinner on the roof, and Misha leaves Hisao and Shizune so that she can grab the food. Shizune doesn't relent on the idea of trying to communicate in sign language despite Hisao not knowing it, which causes him to contemplate asking Misha for more lessons. Hisao and Shizune watch the people below enjoying the festival before Misha returns, having gotten a sampler platter of everything. Hisao notices a lot of couples in particular, and thinks about how a part of him wants that too. When Shizune tries to sign to him, he says that he was almost glad that she tried to coerce him into coming, but if he attempted to date her, that he'd have to think more about that side of her. Old boy didn't account for the idea of her reading lips. He also hits her with the old "you'd be cuter if you smiled more" line, which makes me relieved that Shizune is deaf, because hearing someone say that shit always makes me want to puke. But Shizune beckons Hisao, spreading her arms wide, to observe everything around them. Fireworks begin and end, and as Hisao leaves, he reflects on the idea that he may be falling in love with her. This ends Shizune's Act 1. I really love Act 1 with Shizune, and if you haven't played Katawa Shoujo yourself yet, I would recommend you start the game by playing her route first. I think it's one of the best variations of Act 1 in this game, and depending on what side of the bed I wake up on, I might even tell you that it's the best. Shizune is the first girl you meet, and she sticks with you until the midpoint of Act 1 in every variation of it, so choosing to stick with her and watch her slowly reveal more parts of her earnest nature is just so satisfying. Her and Misha's desperate attempts to get you to join the student council is such a fun running gag, especially as it gives way to a more genuine and heartfelt desire on both their parts, and staging Act 1's finale on the festival that you helped bring to life, man, it's just so goddamn comfy. I don't know what to tell you. I just love it. The vibes are off the charts, and we're only getting started. We have 3 more acts of the story to go, and it's a hell of a ride, so let's jump in. Acts 1 and 2 in every route is strung together by an animation by Mike Enel. I'm not going to be showing off these animations because I think they ought to be seen in their own right, but I do really love the subtle foreshadowing that's present in all of them. The next morning, Hisao walks outside and realizes that a lot of the stalls he visited last night were ones that he worked on with Shizune and Misha. He runs into Shizune alone in the courtyard, and after an awkward experience trying to communicate with her without sign language, and an even more awkward experience when she points out how depressed he's been, he resolves to learn sign language himself. He talks to Misha about pursuing sign language as an elective, and after an incredibly protracted moment of silence, she points him in the right direction of classes. Misha eventually decides to tutor him, because it turns out she wants to be a sign language teacher, and it's a reason why she attended Yamaku in the first place. She gets distracted before the lesson can go on for too long, and talks to Hisao about how happy Shizune was about him deciding to join, and that she finds him interesting. Hisao comes to realize that the only reason he joined was because of Shizune, finding her competitiveness and force of will alluring. Hisao eventually realizes that Misha's teaching/tutoring isn't exactly up to snuff, and he tries to pivot the situation into doing more student council work. But Misha eventually quotes Shizune when she says that sign language is different from any other language, because you have to think about everything before you say it. That means every word has more weight. Every single one is more important than normal. After that point, Misha begins to take the situation a little more seriously. I kinda like that this is the turning point for her. I think it's hard to instruct someone for a prolonged period without learning something new about yourself along the way. The next day, Hisao is asked by Kenji to retrieve his mail, and Hisao takes it as an opportunity to treat himself to lunch. He runs into Shizune while passing by the Shanghai, and he realizes that his sign language classes are beginning to pay off when he can understand some of her speech, but he still catastrophizes about how terrible it is to not be able to understand her fully. When Shizune notices Kenji's package, she tries to open it, so as to ask what's in the box,
Like from that scary movie 7?
but then offers her assistance in carrying it back, as long as they can play a game about it. Whoever stumbles first has to carry it back the entire way. Hisao eventually realizes that this is more of an exercise in teamwork than a competition or a challenge. Shizune ends up dropping the box after her hand makes contact with Hisao's, and she ends up sticking to her word and taking the box with her. Hisao realizes as they walk that Shizune has a habit of gamifying a lot of everyday tasks and situations, but also acknowledges that it seems futile to try to psychoanalyze her. He gives her his jacket when she shivers, his first genuine act of tenderness, and the mail is delivered. Hisao finds himself advancing in sign language fairly fast, but doesn't think he's moving fast enough to converse with Shizune at Misha's level. Misha asks Hisao why he so desperately wants to hide the fact that he's learning sign language, but he says that treating each other as true equals means that he has to learn it, and that when they finally are able to speak on equal terms, he will be ready to do it right. Tanabata is in the mix, and Misha and Shizune resolve to spending some time leading up to it playing games before they have to go to work. During this scene, we see Shizune's text being translated in some cases, but not in the case of more advanced sentences or sentiments. I like that a lot. It feels like a very effective delivery of Hisao's current skill level with JSL. They eventually settle on three-way chess, ignoring Hisao's protestations of whether or not it's even possible, before an interloper happens upon the student council room. Most characters who aren't romance options or aren't immediately connected to your romance option feel a little out of the loop in whichever route you decide to go down, so seeing Hanako here is a little unusual, but I do like that seeing them in this context gives you some subtle insights into their characters. Hanako is a big fan of chess, and her shy demeanor belies a competitive streak. Unless you decided to jump into her route first, you probably wouldn't be given many situations where you get to learn that. I like that Katawa Shoujo is structured in a way that gives you these little pieces of knowledge about major characters that exist on the fringe of your larger romance. It feels like a bit of a treat, and maybe a way to tempt the curious into wanting to try a different route. Shizune doesn't make her disdain for Lily a secret, but I think it's kinda neat that she apparently doesn't bear any ill will towards Hanako specifically. Shizune wins and Hanako is gracious in defeat, but she gets slaughtered in the rematch, and when Shizune gets excited about a game with advanced rules, or maybe even against a worthy opponent, Hanako taps out and flees the scene. Shizune criticizes Hanako for not being a very good chess player, saying that chess isn't suited for her since she plays shallowly and doesn't bother to study it further. I personally think she might be cracking sour grapes over not being able to play the game with her more, but c'est la vie. She deduces that someone probably taught her and that she may love the memories attached to the game more than the game itself, meaning that she can't see it as a tool for true competition. This really makes me wonder how much collaboration went on between the writers for each of these routes, because if you're playing Shizune's route after playing Hanako, you'd likely realize this is an alarmingly transient insight into Hanako's character. But that's a story for another time. She summarizes that she isn't likely to become friends with Hanako based on chess alone, and more's the pity, but the scene quickly ends before Hisao can suggest the idea of playing another game. A bit of a time skip follows, and Hisao's sign language has improved such that he can understand most of Shizune and Misha's conversations. It's cool to see that reflected in the dialogue here, because the delineation I mentioned between the way Shizune and Misha talk specifically becomes a lot clearer. You see that throughout some turns in this conversation that Shizune has some flares for the dramatic that are tempered down slightly by Misha's translation. A major faux pas in the real world, but a nice way to make their characters distinct in the realm of fiction. Anyway, Tanabata's around the corner, and the student council is busy battening down the hatches. Hisao leaves later that evening, but Misha intercepts him to tell him that she needs to have a one-on-one talk with him. Hisao briefly lets his imagination run wild in the sun-drenched atrium of Yamaku's main hallway, but Misha quickly deflates such a notion by telling him that she's fallen behind in her schoolwork, and she needs to press pause on the student council in order to play catch-up. She also briefly castigates Hisao for not coming forward to Shizune about the fact that he knows sign language before revealing that she went ahead and spilled the beans anyway. Hisao flips out, realizing that he looks like a jackass now that Shizune knows that he was playing dumb. It's a little thing, but I think it adds something to Hisao that he has a bit of a temper. Sometimes I think it's obstructive to story progress in ways that are more annoying than they are not, but that seems pretty true to the experience of blurting something out in anger anyway. He calms down a little after Misha offers to buy him a drink from the vending machine, and seeing how much faith that she has in the process. The next day, he reasons that Shizune doesn't beat around the bush, so it's unlikely that she'd be too bent out of joint about the whole thing. Hisao later meets up with Shizune and they begin constructing stalls for Tanabata, but Hisao contemplates how it's a little harder to talk to her when he needs to use his hands to hammer as well. I like how you can hear Hisao and Shizune's hammer moving in rhythm. It nicely complements Hisao's ponderings about how Shizune is processing the nature of this work without being able to hear the sound herself. Eventually, they take a break, and Hisao clarifies under her unflinching eye contact that he took sign language to make things more convenient. There are still pockets of Shizune's dialogue that Hisao can't parse at this point, but he's leaps and bounds ahead of where he was at the beginning of the story. Shizune even points this out. It's exciting to hear her words coming from her own mouth, or hands as the case may be. She clarifies how happy she is with Hisao's decision to learn sign language and jumps back into her work. Hisao drops off Kenji's package the next morning. The boys squabble when Hisao asks about what's in the box.
Have you ever seen Seven?
Yeah, we've said it like 7 times already today.
Kenji ends up telling Hisao about his attempts at protesting Shizune's attempt at starting a merit and demerit badge policy. It's tempting to break my self-imposed rule on Kenji because this story is a really wild ride in particular. Kenji in general is in pretty rare form during this entire route, but I'll expand on that a little bit later. Hisao meets up with Shizune and they have lunch. She doesn't like when her food mixes with other food without her having agency in it. He reflects on how he talks to her less, but understands her more. However, he's forced into a complicated situation when Lily arrives, drawn to the scent of delicious food, and he's forced to toe a line between translating for Shizune and being respectful. I have a bit of a soft spot for Lily, so it's interesting to see her act in a more adversarial way here. Shizune thanks Hisao for translating, and we get to discover that sign language classes at Yamaku are going the way of the dinosaurs. It's a bit of a frightening thing, the idea of classes that make things more accessible being cut for lack of interest, especially since Yamaku is, at least nominally, a school centered around the needs of disabled students. Hisao decides to ask Shizune why she and Lily fight so much. She eventually opens up about how Lily wanted to do things like the old student council. Shizune doesn't exactly make her disdain for the old guard a secret, so it stands to reason that they'd bump heads eventually. We also get an explanation of the badge policy, but Shizune writes it off as being just a joke. The next day, we see that Misha has been able to get out from underneath all of her work, and after Shizune snipes at Hisao about being forgetful, they decide to celebrate at the Shanghai. They talk about dressing up for Tanabata, and Misha lets slip that last year they couldn't celebrate because they were manning a stall with Lily, and Shizune continues to rail against the old student council, mentioning that she took on a lot of work personally, and when the workload increased, a lot of people dropped out of the student council. Hisao disengages from the celebration at the Shanghai feeling pride, which he's never felt when doing something for school. The next morning, he runs into Misha on the roof and talks about the last festival with her. Misha asks if Hisao likes Shizune, and being ill-equipped to retreat, he tries to deflect it by saying that he likes her more. You know that he's just being coy at this stage of the game, but I'm intrigued by the fact that Hisao clearly feels and is occasionally preoccupied by a latent attraction to Misha. He may have been pessimistic about the idea of something going down between the two of them when they talked one-on-one earlier, but he was still entertaining it to some degree. Still waters run deep, I guess. Evening eventually comes, and we see them both in yukata. The plan is to go into town and work their way up to observe the festivities at Yamaku, but Misha eventually ends up fatigued after we have an argument about snow cones, and despite our protests, she leaves. We make it back up to the school, and Hisao tries to work up the nerve to confess his feelings for Shizune. He eventually manages to ask if Shizune wants to be his girlfriend. She's nervous, but in spite of her fears, she says yes. So ends Act 2. I like Act 2 a lot. Seeing Hisao trying to learn sign language to better communicate with Shizune is a pretty natural direction for the story to take after Act 1, but I like how so much of it up to a certain point is tied up in Hisao's efforts to not have her know until he's absolutely mastered it. He's very detail-oriented and has a perfectionist streak, which I think both really drives home how well suited the pair of them are for each other and showcases how seriously Hisao takes the idea of being in a relationship with her. I think his education of JSL and the practical knowledge he gains has a very fulfilling slow burn quality to it as we see him gradually beginning to understand more of Shizune's text when she speaks. It's really cool to see him gradually begin to talk more, especially when we started out with the two of them feeling a bit frustrated with their situation. Not bad. I also think the central conflict of this route is foreshadowed in some pretty subtle ways, which I think really allows the reveal that we see in Act 3 to hit like a sledgehammer, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We still have the rest of Act 3 to get through, and unfortunately I have a few less than enthusiastic things to say about the way we start things off. Having successfully asked Shizune out at Tanabata, Hisao finds himself buckling under the pressure of student council work ahead of summer break. Shizune mentions she's going to be visiting her family for a week when Hisao asks about spending more time with her. Hisao decides to inject himself into the trip because Misha is going. Shizune is chill with it, but when Hisao mentions that he has little to pack, Shizune remarks about how he must have come to the school on short notice, which causes Hisao to remember that scene in Act 1 where Shizune notices his medications. She seems content to leave well enough alone and mentions her home is in Saitama. The next day, we catch a glimpse of Shizune and Misha wearing clothes that aren't their uniforms. I like that Hisao thinks a Bush Cheney campaign shirt from 2004 signifies Misha's true self on the outside. Like, sure, bud. So we roll up to Shizune's house after a train ride, and much like the few kids that I knew growing up who lived in mansions, she's quick to deny that she lives in a mansion. We meet Shizune's little brother, Hideaki, who immediately presses Hisao's buttons by comparing him to Shizune. I find it interesting that one of Hisao's pet peeves is being compared to other people, but I'm quickly distracted by how he's not willing at all to deal with Hideaki's shit. Stranger still is the fact that Lily is here with her older sister, Akira. Tension between Lily and Shizune is stifled by Akira introducing herself, and a fishing competition is arranged between all parties involved. We take Shizune's father's car and ship off to the river. You see Akira again in a couple of other routes, but I think she makes a winning first impression here. She tries to stoke enthusiasm in Lily and Hideaki, which is met with obstinance. She's a good sport about Shizune's jabs. It's like, damn girl, what are you doing after this? The lot are content to fish in spite of Shizune's desire to keep things as a competition. Everyone reaches an accord as day turns to evening, and Akira mentions that she's glad they stopped by the Hakamichi residence. It's just a pleasant-ass scene. I have several issues with this leg of the story that I'm going to get into later, but I think that a couple of things that Shizune's route really nails is how authentic dialogue feels between characters and how effective it is at conveying these pleasant little slices of life. It just has a great atmosphere overall. It makes me want to get out and feel the sunshine myself. The next day, Hisao rises with a migraine only to find that everyone has already eaten breakfast already. He ends up talking with Hideaki before he informs that Shizune and Lily's fathers are brothers-in-law and that they don't like each other. Hisao immediately feels cagey about getting more involved. Shizune and Misha have gone to run errands for Shizune and Hideaki's father, Jigoro, but Hisao is content to tease Hideaki and contemplate what his father is like before Hideaki breaks the silence to ask if he wants to go somewhere. It's kind of nice to see him give something back since he's been relatively curt for most of the time he's been around. It turns out that Shizune asked him to keep Hisao company, and we find out that Hideaki likes collecting cameras but doesn't appear to be into photography. They end up going to a nearby park in order to find Shizune, and Hisao's patience with Hideaki begins to wear thin as he tries to finagle him into playing a game. I mentioned in the past that Hisao has a bit of a temper, but there's something to be said about the fact that he's just kind of a dick to this kid like right out of the gate. It's just on sight. I guess I'm not sure what I'd do if I ran into this droopy dog with programmer stockings either though. Hisao tries to get this dude invested in sign language, but Misha and Shizune end up finding the pair before he can. Off we trot back to the Hakamichi house and another day passes. Hisao goes downstairs for breakfast, and it's here that we meet the Hakamichi patriarch Jigoro. He starts off cordial enough, offering Hisao a business card. He jokingly offers Hisao a plate of bear liver, which are toxic, but ends up making them omelets filled with eggshells. A more charitable person might suggest that it's for additional calcium, but Jigoro is anything but charitable, suggesting that Shizune had to drag her friends around and implying that she does nothing with her time. Hisao tries to change the subject, but Jigoro isn't having any of it. He starts to get increasingly combative about the issue, and this is neither here nor there, but am I the only person who reads his dialogue as having the same cadence as Roger L. Jackson doing Mojo Jojo?
Stop! Cease! Desist! Do not continue with your ramblings, for my ramblings are the ramblings to be obeyed!
Anyway, he rips into the four of them for treating his fishing rods so disrespectfully, but Misha quickly figures out a way to dip. Shizune is furious with the way Jigoro is treating everyone, and Misha proposes retail therapy to try to get their minds off the matter. Hisao seems a little disappointed with the progress of his own sign language during vacation, but he has a talk with Hideaki the next morning, who seems a little more curious about it than he did previously, but Hisao still has trouble dealing with him because his vibes are just so rancid. As he tries to do a crackerjack course with the kid, he talks about his time at Yamaku, and I like that Hisao takes a moment to reflect on everyone that he's met, including people he hasn't seen or saw since Act 1, like Rin or Emi. Like I said before, most of the other characters are a little locked out of the loop once you lock onto a specific girl, so I appreciate when the story acknowledges that they have an impact on Hisao in this way. Hisao confides a surprising degree to the way that Shizune makes him feel, but Jigoro slams in and ruins the moment by, among other things, implying that Hisao huffs glue. I have a lot of questions about Jigoro and how his caustic personality has impacted his family life, but I think it's to the benefit of the story and the game that the writer of this path didn't more closely examine it. Jigoro is a smarmy prick, but he's never really played for anything other than comedy, and to pose a few questions about how Shizune's upbringing may have impacted her personality. Shizune and Misha arrive, the latter having cut most of her hair off. Shizune isn't stoked on it, but Hisao thinks it suits her. Before he leaves, Jigoro has the fucking audacity to add that he doesn't like being yelled at. Shizune takes the opportunity to propose sneaking away from the situation, and after a brief conversation, Shizune tells Hisao to close his eyes, and a couple seconds later ties Hisao's wrists together. Anyway, I think we all know where this is going, but I'd like to point out that in the intro cutscene to the prologue of the game, one of the listed side effects of Hisao's medication is erectile dysfunction, and it never exactly slows him down. In the previous video in this series, I spent a decent amount of time opining about the sex scenes in this game, but just to give you the Sparks notes in case you didn't watch it yourself, I appreciate how sex in this game is usually portrayed as a little bit awkward to suit the experience levels of the people involved. I found Shizune's route especially interesting in the little ways it plays with the use of hands. Sign language having intentionality that requires you to process what you say before you say it is a recurring facet across this route, so I find it incredibly interesting that Shizune binds Hisao's hands, and he feels more connected to her when she runs her fingers over his palms after they finish up. I've read people suggest that this could be comparable to kissing from her point of view. Whether you want to take it or leave it, there's something uniquely powerful about sex, and I find the things that Shizune's route says, or at least implies about the intimacy of touch, pretty compelling. Shizune, in true fuckboy fashion, avoids Hisao in the hours that follow, and he desperately tries to harangue Misha into giving him lessons, but she denies him because she's too tired. He has a little confrontation with Jigoro when Misha leaves to go shopping, and ignores the impulse to walk away from the giant problem harassing him while he reads. He and Jigoro have a brief repartee about the student council and Shizune's worth within it. Jigoro mentions that Shizune has wanted to be president of the student council since she was in middle school, and Hisao is eventually able to go on the offensive. Between Shizune's general influence and his innate inability to suffer dipshits, it's kinda cool to see Hisao stand up for himself and his loved ones in this way here. Jigoro is able to have the last word when he points out that Hisao probably hasn't reached out to his own parents, and Hisao reflects on how much he hates him before the next day happens and we return home. I have to admit, I'm a little relieved. I think that the Saitama arc has a lot of good components. I enjoyed getting some more insight into Shizune's dynamic with her family, and the reveal that it includes Lily, someone who she dislikes at the school. Hisao got a moment where he stood up for the sake of his loved ones against an intolerable bully. Misha got to change up her appearance. Hisao and Shizune put the mate and consummated their relationship. Sorry. And yet, I feel a little mixed about the execution of some of those parts. A lot of the scenes in Saitama felt like they were just slapdash together, days and the scenes that happen within them beginning and ending very indiscriminately. Maybe that might have been intentional. I guess in some ways it kind of mirrors the feeling of time passing while being on vacation, but I think it all happened with so much urgency that it just doesn't feel narratively satisfying to me. It honestly makes me detect a desire to run through as many beats about Shizune's backstory as possible before we get to more interesting narrative developments. It feels like it was included for obligation's sake, and compared to the rest of this route, it comes off as a little half-baked. After returning from the trip, Hisao awakes to loud knocking at the door. He's led to believe that it's most likely Kenji and ignores it, but wakes up later to find that the knock was to signify that he got mail, and observing the letter more closely, we see that it's from Iwanako. Good old Iwanako, you remember her, right? No? Well, that's fair. I guess I never mentioned her by name. She's that girl that Hisao tried to work up the nerve to talk to during the beginning of the game, the one who bore witness to his very first heart attack. Hisao will always get a letter from her at some point during the story, in whichever route you end on, and I always found it interesting because Iwanako's letter always has the same words in it, but Hisao's individual response to this letter implicitly serves as a sort of barometer for how his new relationship has impacted his mental and emotional state. Kenji barges in shortly after he finishes reading and informs him that Shizune was the one who dropped off the letter. He makes himself at home and reads the letter himself, and Kenji surprises me by expressing his belief that Hisao should write Iwanako back. He pushes back against Hisao's disinterest in it by pointing out that she might be too shy to try more direct methods of talking to him, and even mentions an anecdote about his own ex-girlfriend, mentioning that he misses her. Kenji gets a little expanded upon in every route, but I love his treatment in Shizune's route the most. I think he's probably at his funniest in this route, yes, but I think he's also at his most human in this route as well. Shizune's route allows us access to a more emotionally vulnerable side to this character. He may be a weird little freak, and I don't use any of those terms lightly, but there's a tender core buried in the carapace of his multiple aberrations. The boys reminisce on their relationships, past and present, and Hisao is left believing that he wants to close the distance that's grown between him and Shizune. The student council appears to be in an odd state of affairs, with Shizune handling most of the work since there's so little to be done, but Hisao still feels lost in the shuffle in their relationship. The trio are brought together to prepare for the student council elections. Shizune tries to make a point of giving the new government a head start since they didn't do the same for her. Hisao detects a little cruelty in a joke Misha makes about the situation. Misha seems a little more tense in general, clenching her teeth so she doesn't make any sound while she laughs, and in general forcing her sense of overall enthusiasm. It kinda makes me worry about her. There's an underlying unease to her disposition here. Hisao runs into Misha a little later on, and she latches onto an invitation to get lunch, mentioning getting a really expensive parfait, and that she isn't crazy about other desserts due to texture issues. Hisao talks to Misha about how he feels like he has a lot to say to Shizune that he can't get a word out edgewise about, and Misha mentions that Shizune pushes her away when she wants to make sure nothing goes wrong. Misha ends up being absent the next day, and Hisao's opportunity to talk to Shizune comes up when he needs to pick up the slack for his student council work. When he knocks over a set of pens and Shizune's head collides with his chest, she jumps back out of fear of exacerbating his condition. Hisao doesn't seem very content to discuss the matter further, and even Shizune isn't willing to cross the line. I think it's cool that Shizune never really tries to push Hisao to talk about his disability. She made a point of mentioning that it was something that he should feel compelled to do when he feels that they're close enough. She's probably intuited by now that it's something related to his heart, but he doesn't want to talk about it, so that's good enough for her. I like that about her a lot. They end up playing shogi for a cinnamon roll when the time comes to take a break, but Shizune breaks focus from the game to ask if Misha is mad at her. Hisao asks if she and Misha are having some kind of fight, and Shizune mentions that Misha joined just because of her, and doesn't know why she's been so off lately. Shizune is afraid it's something that's her fault, and Hisao has a brief moment to reflect on how their relationship may have become more strained. Shizune is directing her frustration at the whole situation about people's lack of enthusiasm about the upcoming election. She expands upon that the following day, telling Hisao that she always wanted to stand at the top, understanding something completely, making it her own, and that she loved to challenge people that she thought were better than her. She reasons that people at the top shouldn't be able to be comfortable all the time anyway. I think that's really admirable. She clearly really loves the power her position offers her, but she relishes in being challenged too much to feel that she wants to run unopposed all the time. It's cool. Misha ends up showing up at the student council room later, and they have dinner together, but Hisao is surprised when Misha follows him back to his dorm. Misha asks him about whether Shizune is depressed, and when Hisao tells her to quiet down out of fear of being caught with a girl in his dorm, the conversation goes to a salacious place when Misha tells him it's okay if he's thinking something dirty about the situation. Misha explains that the happier Shizune is, the more depressed she feels. She moves closer to Hisao and gives him a kiss, although she misses his lips. Things are about to take a pretty dramatic turn, so I'm going to call a quick intermission so I can fix myself a drink. If you need to go to the bathroom or give yourself a quick stretch, I think now's a good time to do so. I'll be right back.
Down here where the heat's so fine, I'll drink to your health and you drink to mine as we try to make the money we scored out in Vegas hold out for a while. We drink vodka from Russia, get our chocolates from Belgium. We have our strawberries flown in from England, but none of the money we spend seems to do us much good in the end. I got a cracked engine block, both of us do. Got the fights and the lies that we both love to tell, fail to send our love to its reward down in hell. I got pudding for a backbone, but so do you.
Alright, so I got my drink in my hand. I went out for a bit to shave my sides because I get haircuts in the middle of my videos now. So let's talk about Misha.
You may think that comforting Misha is the unilaterally superior option here. She's your friend and Shizune's friend, and she's been acting conflict avoidant this entire time. But if you think confronting Misha is the play, you better stop and think about what you're doing, because this leads to the bad ending of Shizune's route. In some respects, this is a little amusing. Upon this game's release, people were pretty upset about the notion of Misha not having a route herself. Myself included. I was around 18 when Katawa Shoujo first came out, and I was pretty upset that Misha wasn't in the running when it came to eligible bachelorettes. I always thought she was really cute. I loved her bubbly personality. I liked that she was a little thicker than some of the other girls. I don't know, there was just something about her that made me want a verb or adjective noun. But weighing that desire against Shizune is a pretty crazy move, especially since, in case you didn't notice, this is the only decision you've had to make yet throughout the entirety of Shizune's route. I know that this narrative choice is a pretty recurring talking point across detractors of this route, but I disagree. I found myself pretty enraptured by the story that was being told, being drawn to Shizune, this indomitable pillar of authority and dedication, learning her language, coming to understand her unique disposition across this route, learning about her insecurities, coming face to face with her family. I had some misgivings about the pacing of the Saitama arc, yes, but I stayed on the hook, so this choice, when it came up, the realization this is one of the few moments in the story where I can act in a way that's free of Shizune's influence, hit me with unrelenting clarity and force. And of any choice that could have been offered or afforded to us, this choice presents us with the only time in Katawa Shoujo where you can decide to pervert your relationship with the girl you chose by cheating on them. It's as brilliant as it is horrible. It makes me wonder how often A22, the writer of this route, observed people yearning for an official Misha route to decide to ask players, in one of the most grim ways they possibly could, how badly do you really want this? I know you're better than to take this option, but if you do, it will lead to the bad ending for Shizune, obviously. But what's worse is everything that leads up to it. Misha and Isao have sex, and it's far and away the most awkward and tense sex scene in the game. No one's having a good time here, not least of which being Misha herself. The rest of the route goes forward, but otherwise pleasant moments that occur later on are poisoned by Hisao's guilt. Misha sequesters herself even further away, and Shizune sinks into depression, believing that everything is her fault when really it's yours. If you weren't caught off guard by the phrase comfort as a euphemism for sexual healing, it would have been so easy to see the choice as being what it is, allowing yourself to be an accessory to your friend's desire to harm themselves. Other bad endings in this game at least give you some degree of plausible deniability, and we'll get into that when the time comes, but I would defy you to choose to have sex with Misha without knowing in your heart of hearts that you're being an asshole, that the fear of being exposed doesn't crawl in your balls, and when the smoke clears, you don't even have the words to describe your own role in that. It sucks so bad. So for Misha, mon petit citoyen, the answer is no. Hisao skips all of his classes later, with Shizune pointing out that she's concerned about the situation and her feeling that she's losing people close to her lately. It's a nasty sensation, but it could have been far nastier. Misha's on the roof and she reveals the truth. There was some foreshadowing earlier that implied that she was beginning to develop some jealousy towards Shizune. Where the rubber meets the road is that she was never jealous of Shizune. She's jealous of you. Misha is in love with Shizune and has been for a pretty long time. She supported Hisao and Shizune's effort in a bid to make the one she loved happy, and now we live in the hell that she's made. Wanting to support the happiness of the woman she loves while realizing that it would cause her own role in her life to diminish. It's a tough pill to swallow, and Misha's been retreating from the squad rather than face the pain of slowly feeling like she's going to be lost in the shuffle. At the risk of giving mild spoilers to other routes, another reason why I have a soft spot for Misha is because she's very reliable and emotionally intelligent. It's often Misha who holds it down and tries to put you on the right track when you get caught in a bad place in other routes. Whether you continue down that track is up to you, but at least she tries to talk you through it. We could all use someone who puts in that sort of effort. Seeing her recognize that she's compromised and decide in favor of withdrawing from her friends in an effort to shield her own heart is awful, because I can't even blame her for that being her first instinct. Maybe I might be kind of presuming, but I think anybody who's been in love triangles where they care for both the other people involved might see where she's coming from. I love the way this scene plays out a lot. I think I have too many gray hairs to be an arbiter for the modern teenage experience, but it's my understanding the high school stories of the past several years have generally trended towards the notion of exploring the experiences and the condition of out and proud queer youth, and whatever struggles they may face are usually not related to fear of gay bashing or homophobia, at least not for the most part.
Are you serious? I got number 2 this time? You're the sidekick, not me.
Misha explained that she didn't want to go to Yamaku in the first place, and at least reasons that everyone would try to leave her alone, even if they hated her. She confesses to wanting Shizune to be her girlfriend like she'd rather have teeth pulled. She's a very sweet person, but it's clear that she's a product of a time and a culture where her sexuality, or at least her love for another woman, isn't a point of pride or liberation. It's pretty heartbreaking to see her like this, especially coming back to the scene since the game's release. There's more work to be done by the day, but it makes me wish that I could tell her that things have changed just a little bit for the better since we last talked 10 years ago. But she serves to me as a reminder of what the queer experience was like when I was a kid in high school, and maybe that in itself is significant and important. Anyway, Misha talks about confessing her love for Shizune, and we see that her hair is long and brown. She says Shizune convinced her to cut it, but I think I recognize that Misha is one of those types who cuts her hair whenever something significant happens, or to mark a resolute change for the future. Shizune continued to be close to Misha even after she came out of the closet, and it's clear that this itself was a little painful for Misha to swallow. The conversation goes down some pretty dark avenues before Hisao snaps her out of it by expanding on his own experiences transferring to Yamaku, and how he gravitated towards Shizune in spite of his determination to not let that happen. Misha can relate. Eventually, Shizune finds the pair and dresses them down for not being around before taking the three of them, hand in hand, out to do something fun in town. This marks the end of Act 3. Alright, so I liked a lot of the individual elements of the Saitama arc, but I thought the sum of its parts was a little clumsy. With that being said, I think everything that happened afterwards was incredibly effective and set the stage for an incredibly dramatic confrontation. I can't say there aren't a couple of low moments in Shizune's routes, but the high moments are incredibly high, and I don't like how many people I used to see who shortchanged that part of the route because it's not as dynamic as the others. I think it's cool that Shizune's route is a little more focused on the journey, and it uses its lack of player choice as a means of providing a parallel to Shizune's more dominant personality. Anyway, we didn't fuck up along the way, so let's ride this to the end of the line. You ready? Hisao kicks off the final act of the route by returning the books that he's had in arrears to Yuko, and after a brief moment of reflection over the past couple of days, he confides in Yuko about the situation. He goes to find Shizune afterwards, and Shizune tells him that she could tell what he and Misha were saying before they noticed her. She acknowledges her faults here and even mentioned that she ended up pushing away Lily too. She decides to reconcile things with Misha tomorrow and picks up Hisao from his dorm room first thing with picnic supplies in hand. Misha flees when they try to catch her, and cutting their losses, Shizune and Hisao decide to go on a date. Shizune is in poor spirits though. She can only rationalize how to bring things back to a good place with Misha by strategy, which is not really the play here. Hisao reflects upon his own time coming to Yamaku and his own experiences dealing with Shizune cheering him up. This isn't the first, and it will be far from the last time that he'll do it. The next day, Hisao returns to his dorm to find Hideaki of all people standing in front of his room. He apparently ran into Kenji, which is an amusing thing to think about. Hideaki is around because Jigoro bought a new phone and wanted to let Shizune know about it, which is equally, if not even more, amusing. We never know what's going on with Shizune or Hideaki's mother, so my mind is free to be perplexed by what kind of nonsense these two jackanapes get up to without Shizune in the mix.
You're never gonna be a war hero like me if you shoot like that. No wonder that kid from the playground stole your pail. He knows you can't shoot.
I want my binky back.
You want your binky back?
Hisao realizes that Shizune's way of looking at things as being segmented and compartmentalized is probably causing her issues looking at things holistically. Thinking of life in terms of almost completely isolated events has a tendency to isolate a person too. Hisao forms a plan, and the next day they decide to put it into action. Shizune tells Hisao that it feels nice that she doesn't have to do it all by herself because she can trust him, which feels really good. Shizune never tells Hisao that she loves him as such, but after seeing her take on so much work on her own, this little admission feels as genuine a declaration of love as any that I've seen in this game. Eventually, Misha and Hisao meet up, and after they have a talk about how Misha is being a dummy, Hisao walks her through the school grounds and talks about his memories about each place through his experiences with Misha and Shizune. He asks her if she ever misses the people that she went to elementary or middle school with, and I think the fact that she quickly and curtly replies that she doesn't says so much with so little. Misha is clearly dealing with trauma related to homophobia that she's had to suffer in the past, but much like with Jigoro earlier, I think it's to this route's benefit that this facet of her backstory is never explicitly cross-examined. We just occasionally get little moments like this where we can fill in the blanks for ourselves. Misha eventually begins to look a little more like her old self in the time that follows, and the next day, Kenji tries to intercept the mail as it comes into his room, and Shizune arrives to talk to Hisao. I do really love this little moment. Anytime Kenji is forced to interact with one of the girls, it usually leads to a pretty funny or interesting scene. But Kenji is written in pretty rare form for Shizune's route in particular, and I think seeing these two interact is almost worth playing through this route in and of itself. It's some real unstoppable force meets a movable object type shit. Later that evening, Shizune, Misha, and Hisao brief the new student council about their duties. Shizune doubts their ability to follow them up, but that they can aspire to the situation. She proposes a party to celebrate passing the reins, but Misha doesn't want to bid a farewell to the situation prematurely. She also decides to be a bit more generous with herself by leaving the pair earlier than usual. I think I'm grateful for her decision because it marks another scene where Hisao and Shizune get intimate. I like little details like Hisao getting hung up on how he doesn't know how blouses work and Shizune's arms getting stuck. There's just enough authenticity in the way Katawa Shoujo's sex scenes are written that prevents me from finding them entirely titillating in their own right, but I do think this one with Shizune is probably one of my favorites between the art and the strength of the writing. I feel a little mixed for considering it to be sort of like a reward for not being a fucking dipshit with Misha back in Act 3, but that's kinda how it feels, I guess. Strictly speaking, it's not a bad reward as far as they go. After they finish up, Shizune prompts Hisao to go find out what Misha is doing, and we find out that she's taking supplementary lessons to study sign language overseas. Shizune says that she wanted to see people's passions so that she could test their convictions, but she couldn't make people confide in her because she couldn't really open up to them first. So she tried to create things and hope that they make people happy. She confesses to looking at Misha as being an extension of herself, which probably led to her dehumanizing her a bit. She decides to work her way up in her family's company until she becomes a philanthropist, but Hisao realizes that he's the only one left without a goal, and he feels a little hollow about it. He's allowed himself to grow comfortable, so he didn't really think too much about the future. When you're living on borrowed time, the clock ticks faster. MF Doom said that, so you know it's real. He bids farewell to Kenji and finds himself being thanked by the new student council for everything that he's done, while he wonders what more he could have done. It would be tempting to suggest that this is Hisao being sour like he always is, but I think the fact that he reflects on his efforts in this way might be a sign that he's starting to become a true leader. He finds Misha in the student council room, who apologizes for everything that's transpired over the course of the past little while, and asks what it would take for Shizune to be happy, because when she sets up a challenge for herself and completes it, she acts like her skills have no meaning anymore. Hisao doesn't agree, but he does wonder about the things he'll leave behind after he's gone, even if his heart attack has accelerated his ability to think about it. Misha talks about how, through being Shizune's interpreter, she thought that she could make herself happy in her shadow, even after she was rejected. She says that she's going to go overseas like she planned, and Hisao takes note of how much she's changed since those days. They run into Shizune at the gate of the school, and Hisao finally decides on a career path, teaching at Yamaku and resolving to change the life of someone who started off like him, and in that small way, continue chasing after Shizune and the example that she left. They take a picture together to commemorate the end of their tenure at the school, and Shizune's route comes to a close. I think it's a really satisfying ending for this route. I think it's really cool and affirming that the route ends with all three of these characters finally having a degree of direction for their futures. Even Hisao, who was so upended by everything, takes inspiration from the good turn that he was done in order to do right by another vulnerable kid in the future. There's something beautiful in that. We never get to learn what transpires after this story, and maybe I'm just being schmaltzy like I always am, but I like to think the three of them kept in touch. Anyway, I guess I should probably think about winding things down here, so let's get to it. I opened this video by pointing out that popular reception to this route is a little mixed. I'm a little curious about how that will change, because the fact is, this visual novel is more accessible than ever before, which might just signal the beginning of a new epoch when it comes to discussion of this game, which is pretty exciting. I think there are some low moments to Shizune's route, sure, but the high moments are incredibly high. Shizune isn't my favorite girl in Katawa Shoujo, and her route isn't the one I find most relatable or compelling, but there's something to love and fall in love with about every single one of them, and Shizune is no exception. I don't like the idea of her story being shortchanged because it's not as dynamic as the others. Maybe it might risk coming off as a bit simple as a consequence, but I still think the story that we have here pushes through with a humorous lyricism, and the end result is strong, effective, and bracingly human. If you didn't see that before, I hope there's a chance you do now. In a lot of respects, I actually think that it's the patrician's route, and I would recommend if you're fresh to this game that you try her out first. I think if you start the game from the beginning and select her, it becomes a really beautiful and authentic narrative about leaving fear behind and embracing the possibility of change. When I decided upon doing this video series, I came to think of releasing each one as being a jumping point that I could use to make both subtle and substantive changes in my own life. It felt like an opportunity to think harder about a series of stories that I really love, and to take inspiration from them to better myself. I'm a busy man. I have an unpredictable release schedule because of work and family and life and this, that, and the other thing, but I also think on top of that, I might have been dragging out releasing this first episode because I'm pretty scared of change. But now that I'm at the finish line of this video, I feel that this route and this character is a reminder for me to make those changes in spite of my own fears. So, if you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to take the first step in those changes now.
Physical fitness, whatever. You know, whatever. You do what you like to do, I do what I like to do, okay? But you're a sucker. You're getting fed this line about how, like, you're gonna live forever or whatever. You're gonna die. Someone will kill you. Someone will kill you with a knife. Make sure your abs are friggin' ripped. You got some good guns. You wanna look good for when you get stabbed with a knife. Sorry, that's how it works.